You're listening to Becoming CEO, where we share our journeys as solo founders to becoming the CEO of seven-figure businesses.
And these are our behind-the-scenes conversations as we figure it out, and these are things that most people just aren't sharing. Welcome back, everybody. So in this episode, we're going to hear about Ahmed's hobbies, extracurricular activities. So how much time would you say do you spend on that a week, and what might that look like for a CEO?
My goals around hobbies and just downtime are basically to catch up to you. So I want to do like half as much as you do in general, like half as many miles on my mountain bike, half as many ski sessions, just half. If I can be half the man you are with regards to downtime.
I don't know. First of all, I don't know what that means. And second of all, I feel like you think I have a lot more downtime than I actually have.
It's funny because this idea of taking Fridays off came out of a mastermind that both you and I are in. And I got really excited about it because Joel Irway, friend of ours, takes Fridays off, and we started masterminding together with him. And I got really excited. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. This is last year. I was like, 2020, I'm taking Fridays off. That lasted about a quarter. And then I went back to work on Fridays. There's reasons for that. I think you've been better about it, at least taking half a Friday off. But I will tell you, this has been a real learning experience for me. Coming from, like we talked about before, a place where to build the business to the point where we have it today, for most of us, it was a product of hard work, dedication, commitment, sacrifice. Like I remember getting to $1 million was basically, I was doing everything. I was selling, I was delivering, I was doing marketing. I had some freelance contractors and stuff like that, but it was all on me. And I was working 9 to 7 every day, 5 days a week, and I was burning the heck out. And so that's what got me to where I am. And so one, having the space to do other things and not having the pressure to perform on the daily to drive revenue and to fulfill on our promises has been kind of unsettling. It's kind of uncomfortable. And then to fill that time with things that are like overtly not work, like hobbies, exercise, mountain biking. For me, it's mountain biking in the summer, nowhere near the extent that you do it, but I do love mountain biking as an amateur. It's skiing in the winter. It's working out. It's hockey. It's hanging out with my kids. It's those things. So to fill that time where I otherwise would have been productively engaged with work, with other things that are not, pretty clearly not work, it's a real struggle. There's a bunch of reasons for that. One of them is probably guilt.
Oh, yeah. Well, real quick, because I don't know if we covered this in a previous episode, how many children and what ages?
I got 3 girls, 10, 6, and almost 4.
10, 6, almost 4. And I have a boy who's almost 5 and a daughter who is, I don't do the months thing, so more than 1.5, but not 2.
Well, that's very bad of you because under 2 years of age, you have to count in months.
I refused. I think that's the dumbest thing in the world, and I've never bought into it. So just almost 2 for anyone that actually cares.
Yeah, I mean, so the point being, you and I are both like we're right there in those the young developmental years of our kids that are obviously, for those who are in this position, time consuming, right? Like it was a time investment. It's very different from when. If I look at some of my older friends who have kids that are even in high school or beyond, right? They don't need you all the time. They don't need your attention all the time, right? It's a very different life stage than the one.
Yeah, my neighbor, him and his wife had their kids like super early, basically unplanned. But he's 2 or 3 years older than me, and his son is in college, and his daughter is a senior in high school. And so he has I'm pulling down the alleyway to park in our garage, and his garage door's open. He's like a big woodworker, and he's like building furniture that should be sold at like West Elm and I'm like juggling 2 kids, and I'm like, man, this is like, I'm sure it was hell. I'm sure it was hell when you were like 21 and had 2 children, but it's paying off right now.
Well, and the thing that is interesting about our decision here, and I wouldn't have it any other way, like I'm very grateful, is that we chose to build our businesses when we had young families. Right? Which is an interesting decision in retrospect. I didn't quite see how it was going to play out, but your business is in its infancy while your kids are infants. Makes for a pretty interesting experience.
Yeah, and then I did this Facebook post, or maybe it was a tweet at some point that kind of got some comments behind it, and it was like, the number of videos that I've consumed on like 7-figure CEO habits, morning routines of the wealthy, it's like not a single effing person mentioned a kid. I'm like,
Yeah.
what the hell? Like, and that's because most of them don't have kids, and or whatever other situation they're in where their kid is not very, at least well enough involved in their routine to be mentioned.
Yeah, no, but I saw that post of yours. It is interesting because I think you have a lot of, and I don't know about data, right? But just anecdotally, you have a lot of young founders who haven't started a family yet, for whom it's a very different ballgame, right? And then you have a lot of older founders for whom the kids are, if they had, not everyone has kids, obviously, but if they had kids, they're older and different life stage altogether. I agree with you. I think there's probably not a lot of, I think there may be a lot of people, but there doesn't seem a lot of guidance or conversation around what do you do when your business and your family are both in their infancy? What does that look like?
Yeah.
How does that founder cope, deal, manage?
Yeah.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. I mean, that's what this episode's about, I guess. Back to the Friday off thing. So I want to touch on that, but then I want to circle back to where we were just at. You've always, at least since I've known you, you're like revenue-wise, team-wise, you've been ahead of me. And like, so when I crossed the $1 million a year mark, that was 2020, and like that was COVID year. And I was fundamentally forced into taking Fridays off because our daycare closed down. And so my wife is a doctor, so she is at the hospital a lot. Her schedule is probably more demanding than mine. I'm the one that has the flexibility. So like I take the kids to daycare, and most days I pick them up. And she has Wednesdays off. And so when daycare was closed, and this was probably ours, because it's private, I think it was probably 5 months, maybe 6. I don't think it was it wasn't longer than 6. They opened up well before other schools did, like regular public schools. And so Sarah would basically, like, her parents, who are both retired, would watch the kids Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and she would watch the kids Wednesdays on her day off. And then I'd take Fridays off and be with the kids. And so, like, I couldn't really get anything done, sub one. Like, my daughter was born, actually, we had Marin, who's was born in 2020. So, like, we had like a newborn, and under 4-year-old. So it was impossible. Like, I took a couple calls here and there, but like very unproductive. So I just kind of committed to, okay, like the team has to operate without me on Fridays. And so that kind of shifted how we did work and also how we prioritize things. And then when daycare started back up, for the first month, I just didn't tell anybody that, like, on the team. And I just like kind of wrote it out. I think this was when, we had been talking with Joel about it. And I was like, you know what? Like, me going mountain biking on the weekend, because it's like round trip commute, 2-hour ride, like I'm gone for half a day. And that puts then more stress on Sarah. So it's like, if I could ride on a Friday while kids are at daycare, it doesn't take away from that. So if I'm looking to get 2 rides in, but I can get one of those in, during the week, then it's not like I have less guilt, because I'm not like, oh, Saturday and Sunday, half the morning I'm gone, and then you figure out what you want to do. So like, that's been how I just kind of played it. And so it started off as like I took all Fridays off, and I still take many Fridays off, The very minimum since 2020, like at least half days, Fridays. And more specifically, almost never calls. Now we have this, we record on Fridays, but like the sales team does their huddle without me on Fridays. Like they've been alternating to kind of maybe see who can be the leader of that. And like I'll use this Friday if I need to and want to. I have the morning to capitalize on some creative stuff, and then I can shoot out by noon and go mountain biking, still be back in time to pick the kids up and, whatever. So like, that's kind of how I've been playing it. So like we talked about hobbies, mountain biking is like the one that like, if I could only pick one thing that I could do twice a week, it would 100% be that. We have some snow right now, so I can't. So like on a day like today, it's like, oh, well, like I'll do other stuff and I'll still leave and I'll get like a 1 hour workout in. And I'll at least be like the health check on today. That's the thing I care most about. Like I like working out, but I mean, I really try to do like 2 weight workouts a week. And like on a day where it's snowing and I can't be on my bike, I'll try to throw in like a 30, maybe if I'm lucky, a 60-minute Peloton ride. But I get really bored on
I don't
the
even
Peloton.
touch those. My filter on Peloton is 30 minutes or less. I've never looked at the classes that are longer than 30 minutes because I don't know what that's about.
I don't even think they make a class that I think the shortest is 10, bro. So you're just quitting every time.
No, I'm like 10 to 25. That's my sweet spot. Anything more than that, I don't want to be a part of. It's just not.
So, I mean, I do that. Like those are like when I think of hobbies and downtime, it's like I'm fighting just because of the kid's age. Like I'm if I could get those, I'm chilling. So like outside of that, like me and Sarah will try to watch a show together, which she loves to do. I really struggle. I struggle with sitting still. So like if you ever were to watch a movie with me or obviously watch a movie with my family, halfway through the movie, if I'm into it, I'm watching standing up. I'm like pacing. I'm like changing where I'm sitting, how I'm sitting. I just can't I've never been able to sit still. So it's like, she's like, let's watch a show in bed. And I'm like, that sounds like torture, because I can't like get out of bed and walk around. But Ted Lasso has changed the game for us when it comes to TV shows. And just as of recent, Succession, I don't know if you've been watching that, but man, that show is fire and I'm into it. And I semi hate to admit it.
I've heard really good things about both. I'm not actively watching anything right now and trying really hard not to get into a show, which maybe we could talk about. But, I think it's...
I do it for the relationship.
Yeah, no, 100%. I hear you. We're trying to get away one weekend per month without the kids. That's kind of our relationship goal, which with COVID's been challenging because here in Ontario, at least at the time of this recording, we're in the middle of another lockdown. So we actually, it's hard to drop the kids off at their grandparents. But otherwise, that's what we're trying to do is get away for one weekend, even if it means we live in the suburbs of Toronto. So even if it means...
Do you do date night?
Try to, yeah. But that's a bi-weekly thing.
Yeah, we're not very good.
Yeah, we're not very good either. We try to get away for a weekend a month, even if that means going to Toronto for the weekend. But certainly when travel becomes easier, like for us right now, traveling to the U.S. is hard because we got to get PCR tests on the way back and all kinds of complications. But the hope is to travel more. But I think, I'll tell you the big shift for me. It's been a process of understanding that my most valuable output for the business is ideas. That's the thing that I can contribute the most to, right? It's my contribution is no longer tied to hours, time spent. It's tied to the quality of my ideas, whether that be a marketing campaign or a marketing asset or an idea for the sales team or a product, whatever, like across the board, right? My ideas are ultimately where I have the most impact on the business. And when you think about how to produce quality ideas, I mean, read any book on the subject and none of them will say work more. They'll say the opposite, right?
100%.
Work less. have less on your calendar, have less commitments, have less pressure to do things, and more time to just think. Whether that's actively solving a problem, and that's important, or completely disengaging, going for a mountain bike ride, or going to the gym and letting your subconscious do the work. And I think that's the big thing for me that I'm trying to learn and remind myself of is, and they're like, there's other baggage here too, right? Like my dad is the hardest working guy I know. Like he's 80 years old, still works full time, civil servant, and puts in a good 40 to 45 hours a week. And when I was young, he was working all the time. Like when he was my age, he was always working, and he's like really, really good and successful in his career, right? And so like that to me is like he's the epitome of hard work, and I'm going the opposite way. Like
do your parents this is probably a whole nother episode, but like, do your parents have any understanding really of what you do?
No, my dad tells people that I work in IT. That's literally what he tells people. He goes, he works in like technology or something. I'm like, Dad,
my wife,
not.
Every time I meet one of my wife's like coworkers or whatever, like they're like, oh, so I hear you insert something, and it's literally different every single time.
Yeah.
So he's a coach. Totally. He has a consulting business. He's got an e-learning company. He's got an agency. He's got a...
So for me, that's been the thing, honestly. It's just getting my head around that.
So back to the guilt piece. Is this where some of the guilt comes in? Because like, for example, like, okay, so like you mentioned to go out on a mountain bike, like you have ideas. In that sort of environment, for me, I think I get ideas. My problem is I'm not in an environment, because I'm literally riding down a mountain holding onto my handlebars, to like, if the idea comes, that I usually am able to capture it. And so a lot of times it's more like that for me is more meditative, because like things come through and I can't really do much with it in that moment. And so oftentimes I feel like some of those good ideas are probably lost. Unless I just truly stop writing, whip out my phone, and like put it into notes, which I hardly ever do, because I feel like that defeats the purpose of why I'm out there. So then that leads to some of the guilt for me, because I could be using that time to be, say, for example, going for a walk, listening to a podcast where I hear something which then sparks the idea, in which I'm in an environment where I can capture it. And so I don't know, like, what's your thought on that? Because for me, the ideation comes from oftentimes, at least how I get into flow, is like the input, right? So like maybe watching someone's YouTube video, or listening to a podcast, or reading a book, and very quickly idea sparks and I start capturing notes, and like forget whatever I was listening to. Now I'm in like expanding this idea on my iPad or whatever. But I then feel guilty that I didn't actually spend the time finishing the thing that I was consuming. And like, so then that's where I start to feel some guilt. Like I have this free time. I'm supposed to be using it to think. Sometimes I'm out on my bike and I'm thinking, but it's not like maybe fueling the business directly as I would like. So I feel guilty. Or I'm doing something where I don't know, like I guess I don't follow it through enough or frequently enough where I feel like I'm making progress in the what I'm supposed to be thinking about arena. Does that make sense?
I think there's 3 distinct stages to that process. There's the input time, there's the processing time, and there's the output time. And so when you consume, and I'm similar in this way, although I don't consume a whole lot anymore, which is a whole other topic. But when you consume, you're taking
jealous.
inputs.
I consume a lot.
Well, I don't know that it's a good thing, but yeah. You're taking in inputs, right? You're listening to a podcast, reading a book. Like for me, most recently, I started listening to Dan Kennedy's new podcast that Russell Brunson launched. And I started with Dan Kennedy's interview with Jay Abraham. And like, I was walking through the grocery store and my mind was just exploding. Like Dan Kennedy and Jay Abraham in a room. It's the Magnetic Marketing podcast that Russell Brunson launched with recordings of Magnetic Marketing.
Oh, Magnetic.
With Dan Kennedy. Russell Brunson launched it when he bought all of Dan Kennedy's material and then started packaging it. So it's old
It's called
stuff,
Dan Kennedy's Magnetic Marketing Podcast.
Something like that, yeah. Something like that. So I think there's input time, podcasts, books, etc. Then there's processing time, and that's subconscious. So good book recommendation here, Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try. The Power of the Unfocused Mind. That's the name of the book. Tinker, Dabble, Doodle, Try. The Power of the Unfocused Mind. Written by a Harvard psychologist. The entire book is about what happens when you are unfocused and not directly solving a problem, what that does to your brain. And the basic premise is that like the subconscious mind is working on stuff that you have no idea it's working on. So when you're on your mountain bike, some ideas emerge to you. That's processing time. That's your brain just like processing the inputs you've given it. And some of that stuff comes to your conscious attention. Most of it doesn't, but it's still doing its work. And then you have output time, where you actually come back to your desk and your computer, and then you take all that stuff that you processed while mountain biking, while washing the dishes, while taking care of the kids, etc. And you actually
see, I feel like at least on the example of mountain biking, so maybe that's part of it, is that oftentimes when I'm coming back from that activity, I go right into the family thing. Like there is no gap where it's like, oh yeah, like that idea, like that doesn't exist. I guess maybe it could in the car ride home. I could do like voice notes, which could capitalize on that. But yeah, like that's something I haven't been doing. It's like, oh, like I'll just throw on the next podcast and listen while I'm on my way home. And then it's like, I think maybe that's where it is. Cause like I'll get home and I'll be like, oh, all these ideas are flowing. And it's like, oh wait, I gotta be dad right now. I can't apply or take action on capture any of that stuff, or else I'll feel guilty because I'll have just gotten home and like now I need to be in dad mode.
Yeah, and that's the challenge with ideas, right? Is they tend to come to you at the most inconvenient times, like not when you're on your computer with nothing to do, staring at an empty Google Doc, right? They come to you when they come to you. So, yeah, I think like getting into a process of being able to capture those things when they happen, but then also not forcing it, right? I'll give you yesterday's example. Yesterday, I had 3 hours blocked in the calendar to work on a new VSL, right? For those who are listening who don't know what that is, video sales letter, it's a marketing asset. Guess what I did instead? I watched reruns of Seinfeld on Netflix.
Oh, there you go. You said you don't watch shows.
I'm rewatching Seinfeld because A, I love it, and B, it's easy to not binge because I've seen them all multiple times, right? So like, I'm not missing anything. And because it just wasn't flowing, like I wasn't feeling the VSL. I didn't have any nothing was really coming to me. And instead of like trying to force something onto paper that was going to be subpar, I just went and did something else, knowing that my subconscious mind is doing some work on the background. And when I come back to it, I'll be more ready and more prepared. I mean, if you're in the idea business, which I believe I am, I think that's a big part of the game, is knowing when to get down to work and when to not force it.
It's hard. I think that takes definitely some discipline.
Yes, sir. What's your best advice to somebody who is an entrepreneur, CEO, founder, and is getting to the point where they don't need to be doing all the things anymore and is struggling to take some time to themselves and develop some hobbies?
I mean, I think the first thing is to figure out what the hobby is that you want to be doing, and then like add some constraints that like make that happen. Like obviously it's hard when you have, like, if you've ever read the book Willpower Doesn't Work, he talks about forcing functions, right? Like we fell into the Friday off thing because of COVID and daycare being closed, but once that constraint was no longer there, I forced it upon the situation to keep it. And so that, like, you need to do things like that, and I think having a hobby that is not directly tied to your business. People are like, oh, like my hobby is reading, and then like I read business books. Like, bullshit. I don't think that's like a fair hobby. Like, this needs to be not directly the business activity. So finding something like that for yourself, and then whatever the forcing functions are. One of the things that I did that kind of, I guess, I didn't know that I was doing this for this reason, but definitely benefited for years and years. This was 2019. I I was just always like, oh, I hate running. I'm not a runner. Running sucks. And someone challenged me to do a half marathon. And I was like, all right, like I'll do it. And so signed up for a 12-week program and followed the routine. And, you know, it had you running, you know, 5, 7, 8 miles like as you build up, et cetera. And like I had to do that after I dropped the kids off from daycare. And so like twice, 3 times a week, like one weekend morning, and then twice during the week after I dropped the kids off, like basically 8:30 to 9:30 to 10, like depending upon how long the run was, like I was running. And that's where I did a lot of the consuming of podcasts. But like that's an example of a forcing function. Follow a 12-week routine with an end goal of run this half marathon by this date. Like that was like, it was the structure that I needed in order to do the thing that forced me to have the hobby and be disconnected from work. So like I got back into mountain biking, like I told you, those 2 days. Well, this season, while I'm not looking to be super competitive again, I rejoined the mountain bike team that I used to race for because it's more of like a club now. And by requirement, they forced me to go, it's going to be awesome, but like training camp in Fruita, Colorado, which is like the Moab of Colorado, for 4 days of riding. Then there's a team ride Wednesday evenings, which I'll try to do like 1 a month. And then I have to compete in 2 races throughout the entire year. And so I want to do a couple races, and like I'll need to be in somewhat decent shape because I'll want to do okay. And so that will require me to have some consistency to riding because there's a target of, I have this race on this day. And so that's kind of like another forcing function for me that I think would help someone. So whatever that is for you, if you want to commit to a challenge that is, you know, spans the course of a quarter, 12 weeks, I think is a really good time frame for like some sort of fitness goal, if that's your thing. I had a buddy who was doing this along with me, and he like wanted to learn how to box. And so he set a target that he joined a boxing gym, and he had to spar, like a real spar, by the end of the 12 weeks, like real legit, like kind of like a fight against someone at the end of the 90 days. So he was like prepping for this legit match where he was going to get punched in the face. And like that gave him the routine that, again, kind of forced the function of this. That's my advice. I don't know. What's your advice?
It's funny because I boxed for 2 years and my goal was the opposite. My goal is to never spar. I'm like, I'm here to get into shape. I don't want to get punched in the face. No, I think the big thing there is desire. It was easier for you to get back into mountain biking because you had desire for it. You enjoyed it, right? So it didn't feel like a chore. Yeah. You probably minimize any feelings of guilt in the process because you enjoyed it. So I think if you're listening, find something that you genuinely enjoy doing, have desire for, make time for that, force it into your calendar, create those constraints. Like for me right now, and actually there's a lesson in this too. My kids play hockey. I love hockey. I grew up playing hockey, right? And of course I can raise my kids to be just like me or better than me, right? That's obviously the goal of parenting, right? Is to live vicariously through your children. So, but we have shared interests now, which is cool, right? My kid's a little bit older too, right? Yeah. So you'll see this as your kids grow up and start mountain biking and the like, right? Now we have shared interests. So for me, like taking an afternoon, actually I'm going to do it today, to go out to the rink and play hockey, that's a lot of fun. I get time with the kids. I enjoy it, right? It's easier to do. So I think that's probably the big secret here is find the thing that you love to do. Find the thing that you have desire for, and then it becomes easier to do this.
Yeah, for me with the mountain biking, I don't know if this is like as far with you as the hockey, but I'm getting back into skiing again. Like I used to ski a bunch, and now my son, like I want to get him out on skis. So like I got out there a couple more times this season already by this time than I did last year, and it's like I'm like, man, like I've actually never taken a lesson, and so like I watched YouTube videos on proper ski form. I consume content around my hobby like I study for how I study about business. And that was a key piece for me that like, this is sustainable because I'm looking at areas that I can personally improve because, I think, and I don't know if this is good or healthy or not, but like it has forced me to keep going with it because I see areas for improvement. Like I see things that I need to fix in my business. So I go research that and then I go implement. It's like, oh, wow, like I'm weak in this area of writing. Like, let me go consume tactics and strategies, how do people do this, and then practice it. And so like every time I go out and ride, for the most part, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna like pay attention to how I do, this technical section of the trail that I normally stink at. Like maybe I'll take a couple reps through that and like, just lap it a few times just to practice. And like that curiosity and like intent of I want to improve at this thing also, or this area, has, I think in a healthy way, made me not consume business content all the time. So like I genuinely, like when I, again, not that I want to be on the phone all the time, but like, put the kids to bed and like me and the wife are hanging out and she's like, checking her whatever content. Normally she'd be like, oh, you're like listening to entrepreneurial stuff. But she's like, oh, like you're like watching this mountain bike video. Like that's like, she like just in her own mind, for whatever reason, that's better that I'm not thinking about business. Not that it's like healthy that I'm consuming more content, but like, I don't know. And she's like, it makes her not think that I'm always working and like that I have other things that I'm interested in, which obviously is true. So I don't know if you can find something that I think you enjoy the desire, but like also you're interested in finding ways to improve, that you can bring the skills and habits that you've developed as an entrepreneur to that hobby. I think you'll force yourself into some further balance, for the lack of a better word, doing things that are not work related.
And there's tons of meta business lessons to learn from all of this, right? Like what you're getting now when it comes to like re-engaging with skiing, for example, is the realization that, you're not going to be good at something right away. Right? Oh, yeah. Like there's technique, there's skill, right? True in business.
Trying to teach a almost 5-year-old to go down the hill for the first time, that's a test of patience.
And when you remind them that, hey, it's okay, you're going to fall, that's okay, you get back up, you try again, with practice you get better. I mean, those are all like, when I'm talking to my kids, I'm basically talking to myself, right?
Oh,
But
totally,
I think anytime you try to master a skill or get into something like mountain biking or skiing or whatever it may be, boxing, right? I mean, for me, it's like when it's hard, it just strengthens my resolve in business. Mm-hmm. It's meant to be hard when you're doing something new. And in business, we're always doing new things, right? Whether it's learning a new scale or, building a new team or, dealing with new uncertainty or risk in the market, it's meant to be hard. And if it wasn't hard, everybody would be doing it. Not everyone's going to be a mountain biker like Greg or a pro skier or a great kickboxer or an entrepreneur. It's supposed to be hard.
Yeah. And I mean, if you obviously plan to have kids or have kids, you'll know that you're going to have a forcing function of you're going to have to find time to disconnect and do things, or else you'll probably be a shitty parent, unfortunately. But
plenty of people take that path, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, plenty. But I think, to that point, when you choose to become a parent, right, and, depending upon how involved you want to be as a parent, now it's business, family, your core, relationship with your spouse. And often the hobby is the thing that gets neglected, which is like kind of like your time. And so even if you can find one of them, I think especially if you have kids, like it is going to help kind of recalibrate you in a lot of good ways that will be good for all of the other relationships and things that you have, that you allocate your time to. So, raising your kids, while I wouldn't put it as a hobby, and means that there is no downtime, it is, I guess, off time from work. And so make sure that you have actual hobbies and downtime that aren't just, oh, I'm doing family things, because I think you'll miss out on your own personal growth opportunities.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's people might think, oh, just I'm spending time with family, that's my downtime. Good. But especially for kids who are young, that's challenging. That's work.
Yeah, it's also a lot of work. Like it is like you could be exhausted after that. Like, I mean, and so sometimes in a good way and sometimes obviously in a bad way, that if you don't have those hobbies or interests to kind of like release and just kind of get back to you, I feel like it's not, it's not healthy. It's the example of, the classic, put your mask on first, right? So if you're not doing that, like how good are you going to be for them at the end of the day?
Yeah, 100%. Good advice, man. All right, we'll catch you next time.